Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. We're going to be talking about a tale for the time being. This is the second in a series of discussions we're going to have. Somewhere I'm going to get this to make shape. Anyway, there you go. And we will do that in just a minute. I want to thank Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island for sponsoring Something to Talk About. They offer assisted and independent and memory care up on Rolling Bay, and you can find out more by calling 206-594-1010. Ask for Celia or Jamie. They'll treat you to lunch at the bar and grill there. You can also ask about day stay and respite care programs. Their website is fieldstonecommunities.com. And we are meeting on the ancestral homeland of the Salish people, the people of the clear salt water, the Suquamish, who have lived here since time immemorial. We honor them, and we are grateful for their stewardship and their welcoming way of helping us become better stewards. And Anne Lovejoy is with us. She's been helping us along the way to have this conversation. And thank you, Anne, again for joining us.
Well, you're so welcome. It's a great pleasure. We're going to have two more sessions after this, Monday, August 5th and Monday, August 19th for parts 3 and 4. 4 is really short, so I think that will be a good one to also kind of have an overview wrap up, like what just happened. This is a very complicated book. So I think it'd be good to have a session where we talk about like how our views changed over time and things like that. Guidelines as usual. Just if you feel uncomfortable for some of these, we're going to make sure we're offering a safe space where all opinions can be voiced. Just we ask that all of us approach each session with curiosity and willingness to explore. So listen to learn, share the air, keep our comments to fairly short so that everybody can participate, and allow a little silence. Sometimes instead of rushing right in when somebody's done, let it sit a bit to make sure people are done, or just to kind of listen, right? So we're going to start off this conversation with section 2, which expands on most of the themes in part 1. And I was just curious to ask, I heard a number of people say, who are present and not present, who had viewed our first session later, that they found the book difficult to get into, which I can kind of understand. And I'm curious, if you found the book difficult to get into, what made that difficult, and did the story grow on you? Like what turned you off, what drew you in? I'm curious to hear about that. Anybody? Anita, would you? And oh, Jane, jump in, Jane, and then Anita.
Yep. Hi, everybody. I haven't quite finished part 2, and I don't read in depth quite the way I've noticed other people do, but I did not find it difficult to get into. I was immediately drawn into it. And one of the things that drew me in, which is a question I have as well, and then I have an observation about what I've been reading. The question is, what is Ruth Oseki's connection to Whaletown and to the islands up there? I have one of my very best friends ever lives in Whaletown. I have been there a number of times. I know it's so wonderful when Ruth is talking about living on that island. And although she doesn't call it Quadra or Cortez, that's where it is. And so that's been fascinating, and that has been an added layer for me. So I was interested in that. And then my observation at this point is that the poignancy of the relationship between Jiko and Now, it just touches my heart and brings me to tears. It just lovely, caring support. And it just, I don't know, there's so much in this book, the back and forth between Ruth, a total different energy in her chapters, and then Now and all that she's gone through. So I'm loving it.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And yes, actually, Ruth Oseki truly does spend at least half her time on Cortez, and has for many, many years. Her husband's name is Oliver. He is an ethnobotanist. All this, like he encouraged Ruth to make the story fairly autobiographical in the sense that the framework was, not that she actually found the lunchbox. But so yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that those of us on the selection committee chose this book, because there was so many great ties to where we are, to the Maritime Northwest, that we could relate to, that a lot of people would recognize so much of the background, I think, which is just great.
I'll have to ask my friends if they know her. They probably do, because it's a pretty small island.
Yeah, it's quite a small island.
Yeah, yeah.
Anybody else?
I'll make a comment if I'm, say, are you hearing me here in the room?
Yeah.
Okay. I can understand the difficulty getting into the book if you're accustomed to a continuous narrative that establishes one place that you can sort of relate to directly. But I think we do relate to an island. Not so, our island is not so remote and not so sparsely settled. But my own experience was I was drawn by curiosity from one piece of the narrative to the next and the next and the next, and putting the things together. I would want to say that I read the book years ago, and I remembered the general arc of it. I remembered the subject matter and the things that are revealed over the course of things, but it was not clear in my mind. I was reading for a second time, and it was totally new. A lot of the detail. I had memories that were really distortions of what I had first read. So it is a book that challenges us, and I think it fills us with so much eventually as we move on through it.
Oh, thank you, John. Anita.
Yeah, well, I'm one of those that has had a difficulty getting into it. And in a way, that's still, I finished the second portion, and got through the letters from her son. And I think even I'll choke up as I'm saying, the second portion, I read it with tears in my eyes a lot of the time. So in one sense, I'm drawn into it. It's not the kind of book I usually read, because the majority of things I suppose I read are either gardening books or sort of mysteries for just escape, and definitely this is a mystery, and a lot of mysteries go back in time, go back and forth. So that's not the issue for me. I think it's just, I don't even know exactly what it is, I guess. I'm sort of guessing, but it's probably the characters. And I know I just keep holding my breath that what's going to be resolved. Just enjoy the book for, I enjoy learning about Buddhism, and I just really adore this 104-year-old Buddhist nun. And it's so fun to see how now is growing and maturing and has dealt with all these difficulties in her life and her family, worrying so much about her father. Yeah, so it's just, it's hard, but it's good. It's good. It's good.
I would say one thing that has been a little off-putting, I talked with somebody else I know who's not here, who's reading the book, are all the footnotes. So it's they can be they can interrupt the narrative flow quite a bit. And I realized when I first started this, I thought, okay, the footnotes are in the sections by now because Ruth is annotating them.
Mhm.
But then I realized there were some footnotes in Ruth's section too. So they're more, it does break the narrative flow, in addition to the idea that you're going back and forth in these different timelines. Well, and then when you add Jiko's son's timeline, that's yet another one of another time and place that you're mixing into the mix. But I'd say the footnotes if we were looking for something that sort of was interrupted my experience.
Well, and it's interesting because what she has said, at least in an interview, is that she put those because having them at the end in kind of a glossary would be, you'd have to be flip, 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 flip. So she felt like, and I guess her beta readers were saying it'd be better to have it that way. But you're right, because you're like, well, who's interjecting those? Because you're right, initially, and she even says something about I made notes as I went along, as the Ruth character says she's making notes, right? So then, but right, does she make them to her own editions as well? Because that seems a little odd. Yeah, I do feel like that. It's like adding another layer of mystery almost to the book. Barbara, oh, what would you say?
I'm usually put off by movies that jump around in time like this, but maybe because it's written and it tells you who's doing the writing, that helps me feel less disoriented than a movie that's similarly formatted. I don't know, but it didn't bother me reading it. It was interesting, and I appreciated the footnotes being right there because otherwise I would not have flipped to the back. And just in a very general observation, I really needed this second part because it was so affirming for now to be with her great grandmother and to be listened to and to be seen and to be cared about, and just to have the space for her to, come to grips with some of the awful experiences that she's had with such kindness. And I also thought that Jiko's incredible patience and kindness was certainly a wonderful model for aging. And I loved the question that Now wrote about how old do you have to be before you're grown up in your mind? And it was still 1 year older than Jiko was. I thought, okay, I feel good about that.
And of course, we don't really know if Chico's actually 104. I think it's sort of
Right.
random. She doesn't even really know. I was kind of intrigued by the Proust quote that starts it off, and I was thinking about this in terms of those footnotes in a way, where it's from the Times Rediscovered. In reality, every reader, while he's reading, is the reader of his own self.
Mhm.
Which I thought was interesting. The writer's work is merely a kind of optical instrument which he offers to the reader to permit him to discern what, without the book, he might never have seen in himself. The reader's recognition of his own self, of what the book says, is proof of its truth. Well, that's a little convoluted, but in a way, I was thinking about that in terms of like how many voices are here. And some of the voices that are here are ours, right? Some of the voices that come to the table in this, as the readers, we bring our own questions, kind of like what Jane was saying too, like you fall in love with the characters and then you can't help but be partisan and start to kind of want things to go certain ways for them, right?
I was also happy to imagine that her father, that Now's father, had grown up there and that he had that peaceful anchor somewhere in his spirit that hopefully he could access.
I love that part where he hears the cicadas and says, "Oh, the sound of summer."
Mm-hmm.
And looking at those stairs, instead of feeling daunted, he's like, my heart is home, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you get a totally different sense of who this guy might have been.
Oh,
Anita.
I like that quote that you just were reading too at the beginning of part 2, because it's another way of saying, when you think of an artist, I mean, I think that the job of an artist is to help people see, if I put it in a nutshell, and that it's like this is what a writer does in reality, and to be aware that every reader is going to bring what you interpret it from what you bring to the story. So I like that.
I think that's why I've never really enjoyed films about books that I love, because half of me is like, that's wrong, totally wrong
Mhm.
person. They dropped that whole my favorite line, blah, blah, blah. It's like you're so dedicated to the part you love that you can't see what the different thing is, right? But I was thinking about how, as the multiple plots and points of view start to weave together, for me, the story became more gripping. And I started to realize that all the layered conversations and those intriguing little plot twists seem like what she's trying to do is slow the reader down and make us think about, especially things like Oliver and Jiko both say stuff that could, if you think about it for a minute, you're like, oh, now that could be taken a lot of different ways, right? And sometimes Ruth is like, I don't even know what you're talking about. What do you mean by that, right? And you think, oh, because it could go this way or that way. And Oliver is sort of like Ruth's Jiko, right? In a way, saying things that get her to slow down and think about things differently. I was thinking too about how, as the relationships between the characters change, Ruth starts getting more engaged with Now's story than with parts of her own lives, right? And it's like, has that ever happened to you? I know as a writer that can certainly happen, where you can get so sucked in that you're not even sure where you are, right?
Literally happens in this case because she's writing a memoir that she is totally stepped aside from because she's fixated on now. Fixated on the now.
Mhm.
Jane.
Yeah. I keep going back to the title for the time being, and the two ways of interpreting it as just that sort of casual, the time being, and then thinking of the time being. We are all time beings. And there's something very intriguing and powerful about that to me. I just keep coming back to it.
Well, and that's a place where those quotes by Dogen are kind of fascinating. That, oh, that this was written in 1200 or something. The thing about the time being, and that the mountain is time and the ocean is time. You think,
Well, Jiko is a different time being from now or from Ruth, and to start seeing all of us that way, all of our world that way, it's pretty profound.
well, and now we're getting to be elders. Do
Yeah.
we have relationships like that ourselves? Anita, I see you smiling. I know you do, right?
Yeah, I'd say that's good. Yeah.
Has anything in this kind of stirred that up for you a little?
Well, yeah, I guess it's interesting. I can relate. I hadn't thought about that, Anne, but I guess I can relate more to Jiko and her aging than now, who's younger. I'm closer to Jiko's age. So yeah, and I love, as is mentioned, I love her wisdom and her calm, and yeah, it's just heartwarming to read about it. But I also have to say, I find it really delightful to read about Ruth and her relationship with Oliver. The first time when he was talking about the crows, and so all of this going on, and you're mentioning crows, and I love the description of him that other people on the island say he fries his fish in a different pan. I thought that was so delightful, and that she just really is respectful of him, and it just, the love she has for him it comes out in the writing, which I find so heartwarming.
Barbara, I see you nodding at that.
I was thinking about something else, though.
Oh,
I don't have anything to add on to what she just said.
What were you thinking about?
Well, there's a paragraph kind of early on in this session, couple paragraphs where she's talking about this tsunami and all the people who don't understand the impact that's coming their way immediately, and the desire to just run, and it's already too late.
Yeah.
And then she talks about, what is the half-life of information?
Uh-huh.
Does its rate of decay correlate with the medium that conveys it? Pixels need power, paper's unstable in fire and flood, letters carved in stone are more durable, although not as easily distributed, but inertia can be a good thing. In towns up and down the coast of Japan, stone markers were found on hillsides engraved with the ancient warnings, do not build your homes below this point.
Right? That's funny because
Yeah.
I marked
Barbara,
that
where's
same
that?
That's like, whoa.
Page 114.
Yeah, I had marked that too because I was like, now that, I mean, right there, you could talk for an hour about that. Right? That the most expensive in history and projections for the future of economy and all this dire stuff, but that it had been called out hundreds of years earlier.
And people remembered to pay attention to it, except, as things developed.
Yeah, and development and that economic push, that's kind of a Western thing, that maybe overrode the historic traditional value of like, hello, if you build below here, you're going to get washed away. But yeah, but it's waterfront. We better use it, right?
Yeah. I have a friend who used to own a house at Crystal Springs, and she said it was just recently declared to be in a floodplain.
Just recently?
Yeah. So, I mean, it just is the bigger picture in reality for living on an island, and what we need to think about. And then another right below that paragraph was one, does the half-life of information correlate with the decay of our attention? And I certainly feel like my attention span is decreased. I like to think it's the internet maybe, but who knows? Probably a number of factors.
Sure. I
Is
mean,
the
all you have
internet
to
a
do,
kind of, I'm sorry, what?
I was just thinking about the refresh.
Yeah.
You can't refresh a book.
Or my brain. Is the internet a kind of temporal gyre sucking up stories like geodrift into its memory?
Whirling it around.
Yeah. So I thought those are really powerful comments about what information we have. Are we able to retain it? How much attention do we pay to it?
Well, some of that I feel like is about slowing down again, because if you get sucked into the gyre of social media or whatever, you don't have time to think about it. The next thing's already come along, and there's not time, you have the instant analysis of something, and then it's already another thing has taken its place. But if you think about juxtaposing it with those stone warnings that said, do not build here, like the wisdom that we're too busy to pay attention to, if we were slower to process, slower to listen, we might hear some pretty different things. And I heard brains get mixed up because we're just flooded with information like no generation in the history of humanity has ever had to deal with information flow like we do. Ever.
I heard something on a podcast just a couple days ago, which I still am remembering. And it was an interview with an author of a book, which name escapes me. But he talked about 1,500 years ago, the intake of information 1,500 years ago versus today. And in one day, we receive as much information as a person 1,500 years ago received in their entire lifetime.
Wow.
And so our brains are at this big disconnect with the fire hose that we are exposed to every day. And it feels that way. It's like too much.
John, you're muted. You might want to unmute there.
The kind of information that people experienced, let's say back in the 1500s,
Mhm.
after the invention of printing, and books were becoming somewhat plentiful, not by comparison to our experience, but compared to all the experience of previous written records and the like. And they did experience a kind of information explosion. And there was also a lot of suspicion of the quality of the books. The cheaper books, like the books that Shakespeare's plays were, as Shakespeare's plays were published as quartos, those cheaper books were regarded as trashy by comparison to, the Bible and a few other things of great authority. But what I wanted to get around to is the fact that we have so much information that is a record of transitory. We can play back so much that we've experienced. We have information in the form of photographs and movies of our own. We populate our lives with that secondary level of sort of personal archives. And we don't have the same experience of what is transitory. One of the things that's interesting about this book is that it reflects so powerfully on just how transitory physical existence is, and how real dreams can be, and how the various extensions that it's a different world. Information is in such different form, even though I would say probably in the 1500s, momentary experience and verbal communication. So many people really did very, very little reading and writing, but they had direct personal relationships within their small world, but they didn't have the same scope of understanding of the larger world outside of the immediate, home life and village life and so on. It's fascinated me still after my academic career, understanding how different how much circumstances have changed in radical ways over centuries of time. And yet we're still struggling as human beings with trying to maintain values and certain traditions and all of that. So far. But I think this book helps us to reflect on that expanse of different kinds of experience.
I feel like the rules for meditation that she reads, which are some sort of a transmutation of Grandmaster Dogen's original writing, but told in teenage speak, are timeless in the sense that no matter what era we grow up in, we need to sort of step back from the transitory to recognize the relative value of things.
Yes.
So meditation was just as important back then, though, right?
Hmm?
That's interesting to me that we would look back and say, what did they have to meditate about, right? Their life was crawling compared to the speed we're living at. And yet thousands of years of meditation practices in big chunks of the world meant that it was an important piece. Like, I think the human mind has always just been the monkey brain, busy, 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 right? And learning to come to that peace and stillness, what could be more valuable today? But I'm just fascinated that it was equally valued, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, right? I'm wondering, Barbara or Marcy, do you want to jump in with anything? So one of the things John mentioned, the dreams, and I was really fascinated by the way that some of the dreams began to blend, at least for Ruth, and then also for now, right? The dreams blended reality, or they became real. It's like, if did Ruth really see Jiko? Did Jiko really see her? Right? And then when she puts Jiko's glasses on and has the experience of disembodiment, that for a lot of Buddhist people is like, that's cool. That takes years to get there, right?
Mm.
And then that little chuckle at the end, like, yeah, pretty funny, huh? Um, bringing her to that peaceful place despite the feeling of uh, you are not what you think you are, or you are not where you think you are, or when you think, whatever, right? What did you think of that?
Was that in this section?
Yeah. Um,
Huh.
Dream.
Obviously, I missed that.
It's a dream about coming upon Jiko and wearing these big thick frame glasses.
Hmm.
And yeah, and it's a I missed the first dream. There, she says this is my second dream. She's telling Oliver, and I must have been doing what Jane was doing and reading too fast.
it was just a very
Yeah.
brief, like she saw this nun in the moonlight and wondered if it was Jiko. It wasn't like this, she didn't have the big conversation thing.
Hmm.
So, but it's like the dreams build, and then you start to think, oh, is this implying a psychic connection between people, that they're seeing each other across time
Hmm.
and space? Do they become real?
Well,
Barbara?
sort of a variation on that theme was I can't remember the name of the holiday, but that lasted 4 days, and the ghosts
Uh-huh.
of
Mm.
other people came,
Yeah,
and
the
it
hungry
reminded me.
ghosts.
It made me think of Dia de los Muertos, kind
Yes,
of
yes.
thing where, it, and also made me feel the lack in our culture, at least in my family experience, of knowing your relatives, honoring their lives and their passing. It's, to me, it was a way of maintaining connections that seem to make them all feel more grounded in their sense of family and humanity.
And now has a conversation in that context with Haruki, right?
Mm-hmm.
Across time and space.
Yeah. And he's like, who are you even? Oh, I didn't know I had a great niece.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so there's a kind of real quality to it that you start thinking, oh, wait a minute. Are these portals? Is this something that is actually supposed to be happening? And you never, I mean, I guess I shouldn't say that, but you don't know where that dream body is going or where it's taking you. And it's actually, that is a really Buddhist thing too. That's not an unusual experience in some Buddhist traditions, to have living dreams that are a little different from, like, Jung would call a life dream, where it feels so real and you remember all the details about it, which is quite unusual for a dream. And it has some of that quality, but this seems to have more of a relational quality than the Jungian life dreams, to me anyway. So it's more like ties in with some of the Buddhist traditions that teach that, you're not just an isolated being. You may be actually living in a dozen bodies right now, right? It's not just a one and done. Really interesting.
Hmm.
Jane, did you want to say something? You're muted.
Am I?
Yeah. Now
Hmm.
you're good.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking kind of what Barbara was saying. There's something about that, the Day of the Dead and the spirit ghosts and everything. There's an expansiveness in that I don't feel, at least in my life, in our cultures now. Our families are fairly, because we're such a mobile society and we've all moved around. but without this ceremonial or ritual acknowledgement of the families in the past, that just suddenly expands your whole sense of belonging
Mhm.
in your immediate world and in the whole spiritual world too. It sort of is underscoring a loss.
Well,
For
and
me.
there's some speculation that partly, like Memorial Day used to be that much bigger deal in America when
Mm.
people still had a home place
Mm-hmm.
and were in a place where their family maybe was buried and they had multiple generations and maybe your great grandparents built the farm or whatever it was. But since we've become such a mobile society over the last 100 years,
Mm-hmm.
that's really gone for a lot of people.
Right.
And so you're right. Like maybe we had something like that. Read?
And there are fewer gravestones to scrub clean.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the whole question as an elder of what do you do at the end of life? There is no, I mean, my parents are somewhere in North Carolina. I'll never go there and see that. What happens with my remains? And there's no family plots. There's no gathering place of the spirits or place to even acknowledge. Yeah.
And interestingly, crows in a lot of the native traditions, and it's called out a couple times in this, are, are the voices of the ancestors. They carry
Right.
the
Mhm.
names of the ancestors. They carry memories, right?
Yeah.
And American people tend to want to kill them rather than honor them.
Yeah.
Anita, you're laughing, but I think you know what I mean, right? You're muted.
There, my daughter just came in, so I muted. Well, yeah, coming from the Midwest, crows were just not honored at all. It was like, oh, those damn crows, they're getting in the fields again, you know. But so out here, it's a real novelty to me. I'm enjoying all the artwork with crows and the
Mm.
stories I hear about them. And then in this book, that was the first thing that really drew me into the book when Oliver was talking about the crows.
Mm. Yeah, I keep waiting for that to become more significant because that crow is moving through the story.
Mhm.
I was at the presentation of is her name Lily, the
Mhm.
old Japanese lady, and
Lily
she's talking
Kodama.
about the reading of the names of all of the survivors and the crows cawing, and at the end,
Oh,
what the indigenous woman told her about it. That was beautiful.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was an amazing moment. And in fact, Clarence Morawaki, who was trying to read the names, got really annoyed at the
Really?
birds. But then when the elder explained it, he went back and checked in with the different radio and TV people who were covering that and asked to see their B-roll and their takeouts and stuff. And there was not a crow sound at all in that whole hour preceding it. And they
Huh.
didn't come in until the names began to be read, and then they were all yelling. And he was like, "Oh, maybe they're right." Like,
That was
but
great.
yeah,
Mm.
it's like if crows live where they're believed in and they get to carry that wisdom, maybe they get to be a little more than they would be in Ohio or whatever, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And that crow does become, I mean, it's a running character as
Yeah.
Yes.
both as an invasive species or a non-native. Is it welcome, right? And what do you think it represents? What does it say to you?
I'm kind of waiting to find out. Guardian, I think, right now, watchful guardian. And Anita, I talk to the crows when I hear them in my yard. I always feel
Uh-oh.
like raven or crow is over me somewhere. And if they're cawing up there, I'll just answer a little bit. So it's a way to be more comfortable with them rather than scavengers.
Yeah, I say hello to them too.
Yeah,
Hi, I'm just going to get the paper. Hi, I'm just
right.
going to, how are you today? I do feel like this crow in this story, um, is traveling with the diary, right?
Mm.
You know, they kind of came together somehow.
Well, did you notice on the very last page of this second section, in Haruki #1's letters, he refers to a book that he remembers from childhood about the Crow Wars. I am Crow, I thought ecstatically. And so that has a connection with the crow that comes to Cortez Island. And you'll see more of that crow in section 3. Yeah,
He's
Oh.
talking about loving to fly
yeah.
because, of
And
course,
I was
he's
intrigued.
about to
The
be a
reference to
kamikaze.
the reference to the writer Miyazaki Kenji, he was an important figure, important enough to get a good entry in the Wikipedia. So he had a pioneering career. He did write for children, but he wrote for adults as well. Born in 1896 and died in 1933. So he was already an established writer in Haruki Murakami's childhood and so on. So the elaborate, there are certain essentials in this book, and then there is so much fine tuning of or elaboration of the themes that relate to what is most mysterious in the book, I think, as it evolves.
While you were reading that, I looked across to the next page, and we
Yes.
have a quote from Dogen right after
Yeah.
we're talking about how I love to fly. It starts out, do not think that time simply flies away.
Yes.
Do not understand flying as the only function of time.
Yes. That's right.
So that's an introduction to where we're
Uh-huh.
headed next.
Mhm.
And that made me think how much fun Ruth Ozeki was having writing this. Like, can't you just see she had like all these quotes and all these ideas and just threading them together in this amazing mosaic or weaving or
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it. Yeah, this is such a layered, fascinating book to me because, John, I've read it a number of times actually, but each time there's always new stuff. And the writing itself is beautiful. I was kind of baffled that I heard from a different book club that they felt several people thought she wasn't a good writer. I couldn't believe it because to me she's an incredible writer. Barbara, you look kind of astounded too. What would you say?
I was, and it partly because I can't imagine drawing so many complex threads from different stories and different characters and different times and different cultures. I can't imagine weaving them in to a story and not being masterful about it. I mean, it takes a really sophisticated writer to do this.
Mhm. Well, I'm so amazed. Oh, excuse me.
She brings in, it surprised me. I didn't remember it until I was rereading in preparation for this discussion. She brings in a poignant reference to her mother when they go to the free shop, to the town dump, and the story about her mother and how she loved to go there on a weekly basis. And she would buy once again something, or she would go to buy, but there's no price on it, and she didn't understand it's just free. And that was a characterization of her mother in Alzheimer's, in the story, from the story that Ruth Ozeki had struggled to write, and she did publish that book, as I understand it, but she felt she couldn't finish it. the tribute to her mother, or the memoir of her last years, things. So,
I'd like to talk about World War II and the military piece of this.
Mhm.
And so at one point, she says, old Jiko says that nowadays we young Japanese people are, and I don't know how to pronounce it, Hiwaboki. I don't know how to translate it, but basically it means that we're spaced out and careless because we don't understand about war. She says we think Japan is a peaceful nation because we were born after the war ended and peace is all we can remember. And we like it that way, but actually our whole lives are shaped by the war in the past and we should understand that. And I've actually been thinking about that in the context of modern day America and how we have had the luxury and privilege in our age group of having grown up in times of peace and prosperity, and how unsettled I am by our current political strife and discourse. And I realize I still have so much privilege because I'm not struggling to feed my family as a refugee in some country that's not providing for our needs. So I thought, Japan is not the only place with that where that applies. And it's just something that's challenging to think about. And then somewhere later, she talks about when Japanese refer to the war, they have a different name for it, but it's World War II, or just the war. And in America, we've had so many wars since then, we have to have specific names. Was it the Gulf War? Was it the blah, 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 Vietnam War? And I thought that was kind of illuminating and depressing. Not news, but what would it be like to live in a country that wasn't at war all the time? And then the part where the son is drafted and becomes a kamikaze pilot, and how the horrible experiences he has while they're training him to toughen him up, and they ride him really hard because these are all students and they're effete, and they're treated by the military extra harshly. When they were inducted, the recruiting officer ordered them to switch off our hearts and minds completely. That was just a really hard thing to read and think about. And I always thought kamikaze pilots chose to do that. And I did not realize this part of it.
Yeah.
And how hard that would be to contemplate your own death. And that one of his choices was because it would help his mother and sisters financially, and that it was a matter of controlling the time of his own death or coming to terms with that. But really hard to read.
Jane, did you have some response to that?
No, it was just interesting. As Barbara was retelling that, I was remembering reading it. Sometimes I don't think I remember what I read. So these discussions are really nice because they highlight the things I've read that might have slipped away, and now they're more present because of the discussion, which is nice.
And to me, that's the value of looking at this as 4 sections rather than trying to do it all in an hour and a half or something, because there's just way too much in this book to zip through like that. Yeah, the suicide theme runs through here too, of like now talks a lot about how in Japan suicide is viewed really differently, and her dad, trying to do the right thing for his family by killing himself because that would be easier for everybody or whatever, right? The way that people have viewed honorable suicide in Japanese culture comes out in a number of places. And I know that's a tough one for a lot of people who are not of that culture to sort of get your head around. Read.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I noted in this section was that now with her experience with her grandmother, because she, of course, is also thinking about suicide in the first section. Has a nuanced, or it's not like suicide is a great thing. It's something she thinks she would like to avoid in a way. So and of course, Haruki is recognizing that his military mission is going to cause his death. He's not choosing suicide, but it is helpful to know that he is going to die. It sort of focuses things for him. It just gives me a lot to think about, rather than feeling like it's a binary discussion when it comes to the choosing or specific entering into death as a as a conscious decision, as a choice.
Well, and that they were trained by the military how to commit suicide with a rifle, so that the Americans didn't capture them, and they were trained in that over and over and over again.
And if it reminded me somewhat of reading some of the journals and things of soldiers in the First World War, especially where in the trenches, and remembering that period is when Jiko was young and writing, and it was a very tumultuous period in time. And a lot of people knew if they were being slaughtered by the thousands, right? So they knew perfectly well they were probably not going to make it if they had to follow orders and do this or that. And it's like just underlining I don't know if it's universal, but that a number of cultures have trained people, men particularly, young men, older men have trained younger men, right, to become fodder for power plays, really.
I thought that has gone on for ages.
Mhm.
I mean, thinking about, I remember reading about daffodil bulbs, and that the Roman soldiers would carry a daffodil bulb into battle with them in case they were wounded or to be captured. They would eat a daffodil bulb and die. And a daffodil bulb is very difficult to eat. Yeah. And so they really are determined to die. So it's what I thought was so interesting about this book is so many parallels. I mean, I think she's such a brilliant writer because she doesn't hammer you over the head with all these things. It's as we said, what you bring to the book, but also what age or what time you're reading this. So it's all subtle, but it brings back thoughts of, oh, okay, how does our country deal with war or with suicide? And if people do suicide in this country, they don't have insurance, doesn't cover it. I have no idea what it is like in Japan if it's honorable, and then you would have insurance for your family. But anyway, just all these things that are kind of you end up thinking about. I don't know if you can hear the dog growling in the background, but anyway, I just think it's so phenomenal for that it brings so many. It's so subtle about the environment, and her husband being so concerned, but she doesn't hammer you over the head about climate concerns, but you certainly get thinking about it a lot.
Well, and that made me, I looked up when I was putting some notes together earlier, teen suicide in the US and the United and in Japan has just been increasing very steadily. Between 2007 and 2021, US suicides for ages 10 to 24 rose 62%. According to
Would
this.
you repeat those?
Yeah, CDC figures. Suicide rates for ages 10 to 24 rose 62% between 2007 and 2021. So in
Thank
that
you.
14-year stretch. And that says something too to me about the gyre of information, the overwhelm of that, takes away any feeling of agency or makes you feel helpless, hopeless, the loneliness. I mean, did anyone pick up that part where now is saying, hey, maybe if there's a God, you're my God, because you're paying attention to me and listening to me. And I thought, oh, what a statement of total loneliness and isolation that is. She's hoping that whoever finds this journal someday and reads it will be paying attention to her. And she's looking online and seeing that even 2 weeks after her mock funeral, she's not getting hits anymore. She's already forgotten, right?
There was something, I can't find it right now, but it's something along the lines of just floating in cyberspace with no one knowing you're even out there anymore.
Mhm.
And I thought for young people who have such a digital life, that would just be crushing.
We're getting a little close to the end here. Did anybody want to call another thing out? Or Anita? No? John, did you have something?
I wish I could. Well, I'm not even going to try to sum everything up. We've done a lot of connecting it's been a wonderful discussion. Wish there'd been another half dozen people, but this is great. We've had room to really dig in together and compare our experiences. I guess I wanted to say one thing about Haruki #1. He is given, and he has ambitiously, as a young man, mastered languages. He has a global perspective, which it's rare today. And it was much rarer back then within the context of a uniform Japanese culture to be so European in his orientation, learning French and writing in French, and all of that. So his story, which we get in pieces, becomes an anchor for so much else that is more elaborate, more in the present, and so on. And there's more to him as you get into the third section, and everything is more fully revealed. But I guess that's the most that I can contribute at this point. Been a good time together.
Well, and to me, that
Anita
says a lot about his mom, right? Like,
Yes.
think about who his mother was. So maybe next time we can talk a little more about some of those things. Anyway, I think we need to wrap it up, but
I just had a quick question for you all. I see there's quite a number of appendices. Would you advise going ahead and reading those, or waiting till I get to the end of the book?
I'd wait, because some of it's like, there's the whole sort of the temple names and the different. No, I'd wait. I don't think you need it to get you through the day. I mean, to get you through the book. And it makes more sense, I think, afterward. I don't know, that's my take. But you could read them because part 4 is pretty small. So I figured we would include the appendices when we got to part 4 and kind of wrap it up that way.
So on Wednesday at 7 o'clock at the Bainbridge Island branch of the Kitsap Regional Library, there'll be a book discussion. 7 p.m. So and then you can join us again if you're watching this later on August 5th, I guess, is when we do part 3. So thank you all, and I appreciate the engagement that we're all putting in this. It's making it a richer experience for me, certainly, and I hope for you.